The first words my father spoke after walking into my brand new house were, "You don't need to explain anything. Your sister's moving in tomorrow." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I had spent 12 years working double shifts as a veterinary technician, skipping vacations, driving an old car that barely started in winter, and saying no to every luxury my friends enjoyed. Every paycheck had gone toward one goal: buying a home that no one could ever take away from me. 3 days earlier, I'd finally gotten the keys. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the hallway. Half the moving boxes were unopened, and my tiny dining table was still wrapped in protective plastic. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. Every wall, every window, every floorboard represented years of sacrifice. Then my parents walked in without knocking. My mother glanced around the living room with folded arms, as though she were inspecting a property she already owned. Behind them stood my younger sister, Emily, scrolling through her phone with a satisfied smile. Two movers waited outside beside a rental truck stacked with furniture. My stomach tightened. "Dad," I said carefully. "What's going on?" He didn't even look at me. He pointed toward the upstairs hallway. "Emily will take the larger bedroom. You can use the guest room. It's only fair." I laughed once, more from disbelief than amusement. "What are you talking about?" My sister finally looked up from her phone. "My apartment lease ended," she said casually. "Mom and Dad decided this makes the most sense." "Decided?" I repeated. My mother sighed dramatically. "Don't make this difficult. Family helps family." Those 4 words had followed me my entire life. When Emily totaled 3 cars before turning 25, family helps family. When she maxed out her credit cards, family helps family. When she borrowed money she never repaid, family helps family. Every sacrifice somehow became my responsibility. Every consequence somehow disappeared for her. I looked at the movers. "You actually hired people?" Dad nodded. "They'll start bringing her furniture in tomorrow morning." "You never asked me." "We didn't have to." The room fell silent. I searched their faces, hoping someone would smile and admit this was an elaborate joke. No one did. Instead, Emily walked into my kitchen, opened my refrigerator without permission, and laughed. "I'll probably repaint the upstairs," she said. "This color isn't really my style." My hands trembled. Not because I was afraid. Because I finally understood something I had refused to believe for 33 years. My parents didn't see this as my house. They saw it as another family asset they could control. And they fully expected me to surrender it, just like I had surrendered birthdays, holidays, savings, opportunities, and countless pieces of my own happiness whenever Emily wanted something. My father reached into his leather briefcase and slowly pulled out a thick manila folder. "If you think about arguing," he said, placing it on my kitchen counter, "you should read these first." I looked at the folder, then at my family. None of them noticed the small smile that crossed my face. Because the moment I saw those documents, I knew they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. If you had met my family years earlier, you probably would have believed we were close. My parents loved telling neighbors how proud they were of both their daughters. They smiled for family photos, hosted holiday dinners, and posted cheerful birthday messages online. Behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. Emily was the golden child. I was the backup plan. She could make terrible decisions, and somehow they always became someone else's responsibility, usually mine. When she failed classes in college because she skipped lectures, my parents blamed the professors. When she quit jobs after only a few weeks because she didn't like the atmosphere, they insisted she simply hadn't found the right career. Every mistake came with another excuse, another second chance, and another financial rescue. Meanwhile, I learned early that nothing I accomplished would ever be enough. Straight A's earned a polite nod. Working weekends while attending school was what responsible people are supposed to do. When I graduated and found steady work as a veterinary technician, my parents congratulated me for less than 5 minutes before changing the conversation to Emily's newest business idea, one they immediately funded. It became a pattern that never changed. Whenever I received a small raise, my parents hinted that Emily needed help paying rent. Whenever I saved money, someone suggested I loan some to my sister because she was going through another rough patch. Those loans were never repaid. If I hesitated, my mother would sigh dramatically and ask, "Are you really going to let your own sister struggle?" My father had his own favorite phrase, "One day, she'll grow up. Until then, Family takes care of family. Except family always seemed to mean me. Over the years, I quietly watched thousands of dollars disappear into Emily's endless emergencies. New cars, overdue bills, failed businesses, expensive vacations she somehow couldn't afford. I wasn't expected to enjoy the rewards, only help pay for them. Eventually, I stopped giving money. That was when the guilt turned into anger. Suddenly, I was called selfish, cold, and ungrateful. Relatives who only heard my parents' version of events started treating me like I'd abandoned the family, never realizing I'd spent years carrying responsibilities that were never mine to begin with. So I made a decision no one supported. I opened a separate savings account that nobody knew about. For 12 years, I quietly deposited every extra dollar I earned. I skipped vacations, cooked every meal at home, worked overtime whenever I could, and ignored every demand to help Emily just one more time. That secret account became the foundation of my future. 3 days before my parents showed up at my front door, I finally used those savings to buy my first home. I believed putting the deed in my own name would give me something my family could never touch. Standing in my kitchen with that mysterious folder resting on the counter, I was about to learn just how far they were willing to go to prove me wrong. Buying my house looked like an overnight success to everyone else. The truth was far less glamorous. For years, I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above an aging laundromat. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors arguing almost every night, and the plumbing rattled whenever anyone upstairs turned on the shower. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person to stand in, and the windows leaked cold air every winter. Still, I never complained. It was the one place where nobody demanded anything from me. While Emily posted pictures from beach vacations and expensive restaurants, I packed homemade lunches, repaired my own clothes, and counted every dollar before buying groceries. My old car had more than 200,000 miles on it, but replacing it would have delayed my dream of owning a home, so I kept driving it and hoped it would survive another month. Most weeks, I worked far beyond my regular shifts at the animal hospital. Whenever overtime was available, I volunteered. On weekends, I picked up pet-sitting jobs, helped neighbors care for their animals, and occasionally assisted at local adoption events for extra income. There were nights when exhaustion followed me home so heavily that I fell asleep on the couch before finishing dinner. But every sacrifice had a purpose. Instead of spending money on entertainment, I spent evenings teaching myself about budgeting, mortgages, homeownership, and personal finance. I read books from the library, watched educational videos, and asked endless questions whenever someone with experience was willing to share advice. Little by little, my savings grew. More importantly, so did my confidence. For the first time in my life, I stopped measuring my worth by my family's approval. I learned that real security didn't come from pleasing people who always wanted more. It came from building a future they couldn't control. The day I signed the closing papers, I sat alone in my car and cried. Not because I felt lonely, because after 12 years of quiet determination, I had finally created something that belonged entirely to me. Or at least, that's what I believed. As I looked at the thick folder my father had placed on my kitchen counter, a strange sense of calm settled over me. If my family thought I would surrender everything I'd worked for without a fight, they were about to discover they had underestimated me for the very last time. My father slid the folder across the kitchen counter as though he were presenting the final word in an argument. "There," he said confidently. "Read it." I opened it slowly. Inside were photocopies of what appeared to be financial records, a notarized agreement, and several pages claiming my parents had contributed to the down payment on my house. According to the paperwork, they were entitled to partial ownership of the property and had the legal authority to allow Emily to live there. If I hadn't known better, it looked convincing. My mother folded her arms. "We try to do this the easy way," she said. "Don't embarrass yourself by fighting us." Emily leaned against the counter, already browsing furniture on her phone. "I've been thinking," she said with a grin. "The upstairs bedroom would look so much better if I turned it into a walk-in closet." She spoke as though she'd already moved in. My father smiled for the first time since arriving. "So," he asked, "are you going to be reasonable?" I looked from the papers to each of their faces. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Emily laughed. "What are you doing? Calling a friend to complain?" "No," I replied quietly. "I'm calling exactly who told me to." I tapped one number, and placed the phone on speaker. The room suddenly felt much smaller. After only 2 rings, someone answered. Financial Crimes Unit. I took a slow breath. This is the homeowner from the Maple Street property, I said calmly. The people we discussed are here. They just presented the documents. The color drained from my father's face. He took one cautious step toward me. What did you just say? I didn't answer him. The detective's voice remained calm. Are the documents currently in your possession? Yes. Do not let anyone remove them. Officers are already on the way. Silence filled the room. Emily's smile disappeared. My mother looked at my father with growing panic. For the first time since they'd walked through my front door, none of them looked confident anymore. They had come expecting another daughter they could intimidate. Instead, they had unknowingly walked straight into an investigation that had been waiting months for this exact moment. And within minutes, someone would be knocking on my front door. This time, it wouldn't be family. The knock at my front door came less than 10 minutes later. 2 uniformed police officers entered first, followed by a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit carrying a slim evidence case. The detective introduced himself, asked everyone to remain where they were, and requested the folder my father had placed on the counter. My father forced a nervous laugh. This is all a misunderstanding. We're just having a family disagreement. The detective didn't argue. He carefully opened the folder, examined each page, and compared several signatures with copies already stored in his case. His expression changed almost immediately. He looked at my father. Where did you get these documents? My father hesitated. Our attorney prepared them. Name? No answer. The detective continued reviewing the paperwork before pointing to the notary seal. This commission number belongs to a notary whose license expired years ago. The room fell silent. My mother tried to interrupt. There has to be some mistake. The detective calmly replied. That's exactly what we're here to determine. One officer stepped aside and quietly photographed every page before placing the documents into evidence bags. Emily's confidence disappeared. She looked toward my father, waiting for him to explain everything the way he always had. This time he couldn't. The detective opened another folder from his case. Inside were certified copies of my home's deed, mortgage records, bank statements showing every payment I'd made, and documentation confirming that every dollar used for the down payment had come directly from my personal savings account. There is no evidence, he said, that either of you contributed financially to this property. Then came the revelation none of them expected. 3 months ago, the detective continued, someone attempted to file altered ownership documents with the county recorder's office. The filing was rejected because multiple inconsistencies were detected. Since then, this property has remained under an active fraud investigation. My father slowly lowered his head. The detective held up the forged agreement. And today, he said, the same documents have been voluntarily presented to law enforcement. One officer informed my parents and sister that they would need to accompany investigators for further questioning regarding the suspected fraudulent paperwork. They were advised of their rights, and the documents were secured as evidence. As they were escorted toward the front door, Emily turned back to me. For once, she wasn't smiling. She looked frightened. I didn't feel victorious. I simply closed the door behind them, locked it, and stood in the quiet house I'd worked so hard to earn. For the first time since receiving my keys, it truly felt like my home. The months that followed were surprisingly quiet. After years of constant phone calls, guilt trips, and endless demands, the silence felt unfamiliar. My parents tried reaching out several times through attorneys and distant relatives, insisting they wanted to clear up the misunderstanding. I chose not to respond. Whatever they wanted to say should have been said long before they walked into my home, carrying forged documents. As the investigation continued, I learned that actions have consequences, even when those actions come from family. The legal process took time, but one thing never changed. The house was legally mine, exactly as it had been from the day I signed the closing papers. Some relatives who had spent years believing my parents' version of events eventually contacted me. They admitted they hadn't known the full story and apologized for judging me without asking for my side. Their apologies couldn't erase the past, but they reminded me that the truth has a way of finding daylight. I heard through extended family that Emily finally had to face the responsibilities she'd spent years avoiding. For the first time, no one could solve her problems simply by expecting someone else to sacrifice. As for my parents, I genuinely hope they reflected on the choices that led them there. I no longer wished for revenge. Carrying that anger would have meant letting them continue to occupy space in my life. Instead, I focused on building the future I'd fought so hard to create. I painted every room exactly the colors I loved. I planted flowers along the front walkway and a young maple tree in the backyard, a quiet reminder that strong things take time to grow. Friends filled my home with laughter instead of arguments, and holidays became peaceful rather than stressful. Looking back, I realized the greatest victory wasn't keeping the house. It was finally believing that I didn't have to earn love by sacrificing myself. Family should never demand your dignity as the price of belonging. Sometimes, the bravest decision isn't fighting harder for toxic relationships. It's locking the door, walking forward, and building a life where peace is no longer something you hope for. It's something you protect every single day.